This is modern Mexico. It is the 13th largest country in the world and the 10th most populous. It has a huge amount of natural resources and a great location. Mexico's economy is considered the 14th largest in the world. But with all this, in 2022, according to official data, there were more than 2.5 million attempts to illegally cross the border with the United States by Mexican residents. So why do Mexicans want to flee a country that has been experiencing economic growth for a long time? Today, in 10 minutes, I will tell you how the Mexican economy has developed and what it depends on, why there is such an unfair distribution of income in Mexico, and most importantly, why Mexicans are leaving their country en masse. Hello! This is the backside of Mexico, which is not described in any travel guide. Let's go! Mexico is the second largest country in Latin America. If you look at the GDP of this country, it will amount to $139 billion, which makes it the 14th largest economy in the world. From 1990 to 2019, the average GDP growth rate was 6.6%. But if you look at GDP per capita, Mexico will be a kind of average among Latin American countries. Countries like Costa Rica, Chile, Panama, and Argentina are far ahead of it. So what does Mexico's economy depend on now? Let's turn our guide back a few pages. After the Second World War, the country's course was aimed at industrializing, and for a long time, this strategy worked. But in 1970, oil was discovered in Mexico. And as it usually happens, the principle of why improve something inside the country when you have oil began to work. Therefore, during the 80s and 90s, the Mexican economy often went into recession because oil prices were falling. But when and why did the Mexican economy start growing? As I said, the first reason is oil, and the second is access to the country with the largest consumer market in the world. The fact is that Mexico has more than 3,000 kilometers of common border with the United States. And after signing a free trade agreement with the United States and Canada, things went up. There is another factor. Mexicans are considered a nation that works very hard, while average salaries are quite low. And of course, because of cheap labor, all major brands have opened their factories there. Mexico is now the 7th largest country in the world in terms of car production. The most famous car plants in Mexico are Nissan, Ford, Honda, and Volkswagen. Currently, Mexico earns the most money from cars, trucks, spare parts, computers, and oil. At the same time, the main buyer of goods is the United States, followed by China and Germany. Another major source of foreign exchange earnings is remittances sent across the border from the north by migrant workers. In 2022, Mexicans from the United States sent $58.5 billion to their home country of Mexico. This is almost 4% of the country's GDP. It is worth saying a few more words about maquiladoras, American factories that are fully export-oriented and receive all the necessary production materials from the United States duty-free. Maquiladoras account for 50% of all official jobs in the country. So the reason for the growth of Mexico's economy is that it has the largest consumer market. So why are Mexicans fleeing in droves from a country where the economy has been gaining momentum in recent decades? Let's move on to the next section. As I said, in 2022 alone, there were more than 2 million attempts to illegally cross the border. But what is the reason? One of the problems is poverty and inequality. It is not as significant as in Brazil or Colombia, but it is still a matter of serious concern. To determine inequality within a country, there is a Gini coefficient, which shows how evenly income is distributed among the population. The higher it is, the worse things are. So for Mexico, it is 45.4. For comparison, in the United States, it is 39.7. In Brazil, 52.9. An example of such an uneven distribution can be seen in the capital, Mexico City. For example, The rich Palenque neighborhood in Mexico City and the poor neighborhoods are two completely different worlds that do not intersect. The rich have their own shops, their own entertainment centers, their own security. It is absolutely safe in these neighborhoods. On the other hand, a good half of the population in poor areas lives in informal housing without central water supply, relying on tanker trucks. Today, up to 50% of all buildings in the Mexico City metropolitan area are unauthorized construction on land with a semi-legal gray status. As a rule, such areas do not have centralized water supply, and the provision of basic utilities is limited, as well as other social services. Such informal housing areas are located mostly to the north of Mexico City and in its southernmost part, occupying all the slopes of the surrounding hills. And if someone has no money, then someone else has a lot of it. There are many rich people in the country. For examples, Carlos Slim, who has been considered the richest man on earth for 4 years in a row since 2010. He is worth $53.5 billion, which is 6% of all goods and services in Mexico. And he made his billions on monopolies. His companies control 92% of all wired telecommunications in the country and 2/3 of all mobile communications in Mexico and the rest of Latin America. The worlds of the rich and the poor hardly intersect, each living their own lives. As the Mexicans themselves say, there are only two places where Mexicans of different levels meet: at a soccer stadium and at the Basilica of the Virgin of Guatemala, where all Mexicans are her children. Therefore, the flight of Mexicans to the United States is a good way to make money, especially if you work illegally, so that there are no difficulties with official registration. That's why in 1950, 1 million Mexicans a year were crossing the border with the States. Another sad activity that leads to instability and chaos is the high level of corruption. According to the Corruption Perceptions Index, Mexico ranks 126th, along with El Salvador, Kenya, and Togo. It is also worth noting the terrible situation with press freedom. There is corruption in the press in Mexico, as well as cases of kidnapping and murder of journalists. All these problems definitely influence the decision of Mexicans to leave their home. Currently, there are 37.2 million Mexicans in the United States, and most of them live in the territories that once belonged to Mexico before the mid-19th century. For example, these are the states of California and Texas. But there is an even more important reason for migration. It is a matter of security. Here's a good example. There is a unique city called Nogales on the border of Mexico and the United States. One part of it belongs to the United States, the other to Mexico. So in the Mexican part of it, there were exactly 365 murders per year in 2021. That is 1 murder per day. While in the American part of it, there were 0 murders per year. So why is this happening? Let's move on to the next section. But first, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss interesting stories about other countries. The best way to support the channel is to like this video. Thank you. Awesome. I think many of you have heard something about the level of danger in Mexico. Let's look at the facts. Today, Mexico is one of the world leaders in the number of murders, with 29 per 100,000 people in Mexico. What is the reason for this? According to the CIA, as of 2018, 20% of the country's territory was not controlled by the central government, being under the rule of drug cartels. It is from there that Mexicans flee to the north by the tens of thousands every month because of the lack of power and state protection. The main reason is the black economy market, which is growing in Mexico every year. Geography is to blame. On the one hand, the most developed market is the United States, and on the other hand, Colombia, where all the illegal drugs that are in demand in the United States are growing. In the 20th century, when prohibition was introduced, Mexicans supplied all kinds of alcohol there. Soon, the supplies reached such a scale that the production of alcohol in Mexico increased 8 times. Then, when alcohol was legalized, Mexico began to supply weed. In 1996 to 98, there was a major outbreak of crime, and in 2006, the new president announced the beginning of an unprecedented war on drugs. As a result, during the 6 years of his rule, 120,000 victims of this war were counted. There are areas in Mexico that are not controlled by the government. The power here belongs to drug cartels. It is from such areas that locals flee in search of safety. For example, the state of Guerrero. There are cities here that have neither military nor police. No one but the locals enter such areas in principle. However, in some states, in addition to gangs, there are also self-defense groups that try to ensure security in their homes on their own. Another example is Tepito, a poor neighborhood in Mexico City. It is a state within a state. In the evening, there is a very large flow of drug trafficking, which turns Tepito into a neighborhood of impunity. At the same time, this neighborhood is actually the heart of the city, an area that almost no one pays attention to. In many neighborhoods, there are no police. Their functions are performed by cartels. Cartels in some neighborhoods collect money from the sale of goods. Either you pay or they do business in your establishment. There is always a choice. And if Mexico used to be an intermediary, for example, supplying goods from Colombia, now Mexicans are becoming major producers. And these cartels throughout the country provide production, logistics, security, and today they are no longer just for drug trafficking. Here's an example of avocados. Mexico grows the largest amount of avocados on the planet. Their sales bring in $3.1 billion a year. And now drug cartels are starting to take over this business. Therefore, the high level of insecurity in the country, poverty, and unequal income distribution are the main reasons for the large number of Mexicans migrating to the United States. Currently, there is a large fence on the border between Mexico and the United States, as well as a bunch of invisible barriers, balloons in the air with cameras, observation towers with cameras, including night vision and seismic sensors. Nevertheless, there are many ways to get into the United States. For example, underground tunnels with ventilation and drainage systems. These tunnels are also contracted by cartels. Or there are people who can smuggle illegal immigrants across the border. It costs an average of $7,500 to $8,000, but only if you are Mexican. For foreigners, the rates are higher. It is in the constant struggle with circumstances that the character of Mexicans, spontaneous and hot, was formed. But will Mexico be able to fix the situation inside the country? We'll see in the future. What do you think? Write what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if you like the video, please press the like button. See you later. Bye.